Welcome, everybody. I'm Mark Peter Davis, Managing Partner of Interplay Ventures. Today, we're having a conversation with Max Haot, the CEO of Launcher. Launcher is a company that is creating rockets to deliver satellites into space. I found the conversation to be absolutely fascinating. Max takes us through his journey to America as an entrepreneur. He explains how the space industry actually operates and introduces us to the concept of minimum viable process. I hope you enjoy the chat. This episode is brought to you by Spark Digital. Spark Digital is a full-service provider of technology consulting, software design, and development services. They work with companies in the communications, media, and technology industries. If you're interested in learning more, visit sparkdigital.com. Max, thanks for being on.
Mark, thanks for having me.
All right, so let's get started. Would you mind giving us an overview of your entrepreneurial journey? Maybe start from the beginning, some context on who you are and what you've done.
Yeah, great. So I'm originally from Belgium, now a thankful naturalized citizen. And when I finished high school, I wanted to be a TV director. So I ended up doing an internship in London in '95 to learn to be a live TV director. And as I started that internship, I realized it was really, really tough to get a job in television. It was a TV company called IMG. But I realized that this thing called the internet was kind of starting. And as a kid, I had done BBS and wrote my own BBS and kind of had been into computers and, kind of the online version pre-internet there. And I realized that I should really focus on the internet. So I started my career building website and content management system for large sport federations like Wimbledon, Manchester United, the European Tour of Golf, the US Tennis Association. And within that company, we built, live scoring, website, publishing system. And by the time I was 20, I had 100 people working for me, building high-scale websites. And then through that, I started to specialize in video. So we were already doing audio streaming, at that time, and then video streaming as bandwidth started to increase. And I ended up building a lot of video product, which we sold to Verizon in 2004 or 5. And
you sold the product, or you sounds like you started this agency. Did you sell the whole agency?
Yeah,
or just
I was part of
a
company called IMG. You can check them, img.com. They do sport management and TV and so on and technology. But I'd created like a division and a product, and they bought the asset, the product, which was a content management product. Okay. And with that came the opportunity to immigrate to the US. So I was already, from Belgium, 10 years in England. And then this opportunity was there, super excited about it. Always dreamed to move to the US, whether to the West Coast or East Coast, and got the chance. So 2005, here I come, arrive in New York, run sales for Verizon, and, do an earn-out for 2 years. It's obviously, as you'd expect, pretty corporate, but still pretty interesting. And then at the right time, I decided to leave and start my first, real company, which was Livestream. It actually started being called Mogulus. And the
remember. I first met you when it was still Mogulus.
In this day. And the vision, which is very relevant today, was a TV studio in the cloud, so that anyone could mix multiple camera and do graphics and live stream on the internet without knowing anything technical. So obviously today that's a very relevant proposition. As we evolve, we focused on a rebranding, one of the best business decision, I guess, at the time. We bought livestream.com, same product, rebranded it at Livestream. And then we focused on a SaaS product to enable, creators and organizations around the world, from churches to schools to businesses, newspapers, and so on, that wanted to do live streaming, but, knew nothing about how to build a video player and buy $20,000 encoders and so on. So with Livestream, they could obviously easily start. And we had a very scalable, obviously, video player and CDN, and very affordable. So the business became, a SaaS business for white label streaming. We grew it to over 60 million in revenue. And in 2017, we sold it to IAC Vimeo. So that's at the time, you asked the adventure.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I had already set my eyes, after between 95 to, 2017. That's a pretty long time to do internet and video. And you start to think, I'm 43, about what you want to do for the second part of your career and where you want to go. And so for me, aerospace and, I have huge passion in hardware. Actually, the camera we use now is another business around called Mevo.com, live streaming cameras that I got back from Vimeo a year and a half ago. But my true passion and long-term adventure is to contribute to space exploration, right? In any way. Obviously, you have to have some commercial service. So the first service we're building is delivering small satellites to orbit, and we can talk about how challenging and unique and hard it is. But what we talk about me personally, it's more about, okay, my next phase, I want to, contribute to space exploration. I think that's the most important thing that we can be doing. In 10,000 years, if we are still around, we will be multiplanetary, I believe, and the moon landing and probably Sputnik will be the most important event of at least this century and last century and beyond. Everything else is noise at that point. So that's my passion and my interest. And I started Launcher. So as soon as we sold to Vimeo as part of the deal, I started focus full time on Launcher. And that's been since the end of 2017, and here we are. And the Mevo side was an opportunity. Vimeo wanted to kind of spin it out, divest it. It's an incredible team, incredible product. So I acquired it back, but the end goal is funding for Launcher. Even though obviously it's an incredible product that I love.
So you love film, tech, and space. Let's unpack that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What was it about the film side that got you captured initially? Because you've moved away from that. What is that, and does that bleed into anything that's shaped your perspective and what you're doing now?
It's interesting. There's actually a movie that, it's computers, not film, and rockets. Have you seen War Games and modems?
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of, sometimes I look back at the movie and I'm like, did that just define everything about my life? That's kind of silly. It's obviously not serious. But for the videos piece, I remember I had the chance to be a friend of mine at high school. His dad ran the only private TV station in Belgium, or the only French-speaking. We're only 10 million people there, and the French-speaking is 5 million. So there's not many TV stations for 5 million. But I had the chance to be in the newsroom. In Europe, everybody's watching the news every day, or at least did at the time. And I was in the newsroom and seeing the live director that was calling the shots, right, and cutting and doing the graphics and the live editing. And somehow I kind of locked on that, like, oh, I want to do that. It's one of these things, right? And so it wasn't from a film point of view. It was always from a live. And, I think it's so powerful, right? The idea that this person is deciding what millions of people are watching, or however many were watching.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's an interesting job, right? And it's high skilled and it's tech. So that's how it started. So I ended up democratizing that job, right? At the end, building video switchers and cameras and platform that allows anyone to do that. But somehow in a roundabout way, I guess.
And how did you get into tech? Was that something through school, or what gave you the technical chops to bridge?
That's the link back to War Games. I think I got a Commodore 64, or I know, like at 7 or something like that. And I wasn't interested in gaming so much at the time. I was doing, basic programming and, like, for example, replicating the cash register of the local store, like printing, choosing things in your shopping cart and so on. So that's 7, 8-year-old, maybe 8. And then I was lucky. Even at that time, I saw the movie War Game. I'm like, I want a modem. And I was in the computer store at that age, and they had a 300 bits per second modem. I got that, and that just started my interest already calling BBS and so on. And then for one of my like birthday or something like that, I got enough presents for many people so I could buy my first computer, which was very expensive. It's probably, in that time's dollar, it was like $1,500 to buy a computer. So for a 9-10-year-old. So I was very lucky. My parents, bought me a computer, and that was a DOS, PC XT computer. And then I started programming and doing different language. And then ultimately I built my own BBS software, and I ran it so people would call and exchange software. And I would call the US to download like antivirus software to distribute them locally in Belgium. And then my parents would get these crazy bills. It was kind of an interesting time. But
so you were a child hacker.
Yeah, well, not hacker. I might have tried to hack a few times, but I don't think I was a hacking prodigy. But yeah, I love computing. But actually, at the time, I thought it was a bit, I don't know, like a bit too geeky for me or whatever. And that was a different. So I wasn't kind of set on doing computer science, and with hindsight, I probably should have. That was, no one really gave me that advice. So I was set on doing this video thing because I thought it was really great and interesting. And then kind of the computer thing kind of got back very quickly, by the time I was 18, when I got my first, unpaid internship job that I ended up staying for 10 years at this place in London.
And that was IMG?
Mm-hmm.
Right, okay. And so did you go to IMG after college, or how did you end up?
No college, zero. So I went there, basically
college. Great. Tell us about that.
This friend that... and I really hope my kids go to college. So I think it's pretty risky what I did. But there you go, I did it. But this friend that had his dad at a TV station basically got me an internship at IMG in London. And it was supposed to be a 1-year internship as a favor. And then, I was working in the library putting videotapes in a warehouse. At the time, TV station, relied a lot on beta videotapes to be organized and create content. So I was there, and then quickly they realized I had internet skills and computer skills. And then, I basically, the son of the founder, Todd McCormack, he was based in the US, found me, and then suddenly it's like, oh, okay, develop this website, and hey, why don't you hire 2 people? And, like 2 years forward, and we had 100 engineers working for me, and, doing all of that stuff. So it was just kind of organic. And so for 2 years, I think I was unpaid. And it was always like I was called my dad and said, okay, I'm going to go back to school. At that time, I was thinking about film school. So that I'm glad I didn't do. But it's like, you sure you want me to go back to Belgium? Like there's a real opportunity here. This thing, the internet, it's kind of might not be around. The opportunity might not be around if I go away for 3 years and come back.
Right.
And so I just kept going, and I got a job, and I got a salary, and a bigger one, and just year by year, iterated.
Sounds like you seized the moment. Scaling up to manage 100 people is probably more useful than a college degree for most.
Yeah, I don't know how good I was at it. Maybe I should interview some people at the time. But we did it, and the products were good, and the output was good. But yeah, that's an incredible opportunity to learn.
Absolutely.
And to create value. We were doing a lot of stuff with a lot of eyeballs at the time, and it was pretty hard to scale. Right, we would do a Man United website, or even Wimbledon. We would do this Java applet with real-time scores. That was the first time, so you could go on Wimbledon.com and see the scores. And even at the time, the internet was obviously nowhere near as big, but the technology also for servers and the bandwidth was not there. We would host in our office with like a 10 megabits line. I mean, it was just ridiculous. So scaling this stuff for this kind of world-class sport brand audience was always, learning with the fire hose. We were doing some interesting stuff. So,
now, why did you want to come to the U.S.? What was for a lot of the people who are going to hear this, I would assume they're going to be all over the world and they'll have different perspectives. Growing up in Belgium, what was the draw of the U.S. at that point for you?
I mean, it's always been about work opportunity and entrepreneurship opportunities. So England was, I guess there were more opportunity for me to do what I did in England than in Belgium. So that's kind of how I ended up there and stayed there. And I love England and English people. But there is a certain, if you look at what happened in the pre-dot-com boom, for those who were not around or whatever, like pre-2000 internet boom, and then later, there was a lot of more things happening, even here in New York and on the West Coast, from, if you look at it from the UK side. So for me, it was very clear. My goal was always creating a company and getting investors. It just was really impossible in New York. I couldn't even see how I would get investors in London. I'm talking about early 2000s. without, a background and having proven that I can run a company myself. And in New York, obviously there was a lot more opportunities, and I did start it with the cash proceed I made from this transaction. So even though it wasn't the IMG to Verizon, even though it wasn't my own company, it was an exit, and I had shadow equity. So it did allow me enough capital to start on my own without any seed funding, Mogulus, and then we kind of started from there. So opportunity. Entrepreneurship opportunity. It's clear, and and by the way, what was interesting is I had a lot of Belgian investors, and I still do, and a lot of European investors in my New York-based ventures, and so there are a lot of relationship and capital you can leverage for entrepreneurship. But I actually don't believe they would have invested if I was in Belgium. So
that's fascinating, and I feel like it's changed a lot. London, Paris, Berlin are all increasingly startup hubs. Have you had any inclination, or desire to relocate back at this point?
I mean, many of my friends throughout the year in New York were, temporary expat. I've always been an immigrant. Even when I was in London, I wanted to stay there and be there from day one, and I just moved to the U.S. As a later decision. And in the U.S., I've always been like, hey, I'm an immigrant, so my wife Rachel is American, my kids are American. I might move around one day around the U.S. But yeah, I'm a really proud, naturalized, American passport holder. And it turns out that it's also very important for what I'm doing now with defense and aerospace. But it's in my heart what I want to do.
Now, you mentioned your wife, Rachel. If I'm correct, you're half of a power couple. You want to give me, you mind just giving everyone a little overview of what your wife does?
Rachel. So we've been married since 2012, and then at the time she was a chief digital officer under Mike Bloomberg, and then she for New York City, then for New York State under Governor Cuomo for a few years. Did an incubator, and now she runs an incubator and a kind of a accelerator for technology within the MTA as part of the Partnership for New York. So we both work. She's definitely, very accomplished, and it's amazing to have a partner to not only build a family, but also, understand what technology is and is innovating and fully engaged in the communities.
And at this point, you both interface with the government at some level too, which is an interesting parallel.
Yep.
So you came out of the Verizon role. You had made some money.
Mm-hmm.
How did that enable you to think about your next move when you went to do Mogulus Livestream?
So it was a very simple process. It was okay. So I need to start a startup, and I kind of brainstormed a few ideas. They were all centered around video. One was a service to help video podcasts create graphics on top of easily add value and graphics and treatment on not recorded video, right? On unrecorded video. And YouTube already was, had been bought by Google, and all of this was already going on, right, in 2007, 2008, when I started Livestream or Mogulus. And then, another one was Democratizing live. I had done a lot of live video. At the time, if you wanted to do any live video, you had to, buy an encoder, $5,000-$10,000. You had to go to a content distribution network, companies like Akamai that, no one had heard of other than technology people. You had to go to a salesperson and negotiate, a deal for maybe $50,000 a year and more. And then you had to build a video player, which when we started was Flash. But then when the iPhone came out, you had to, build something else, and you had to build an entire platform. And that's how, newspapers and media companies and everybody would do live. And if you wanted to do live as a turnkey service, as we know, on Livestream, YouTube, Twitch, wherever, that was not available. And so it's a pretty good idea that one should do that, right? Plug a camera in a computer, press a go live button, and have a player that can have, one person to, a million person watching. And what was interesting, you can clearly tell it was in the air, is that the week or the month we launched, at the time, our competitor, Justin TV and Ustream, we were kind of the three, all came out the same week a month.
Wow.
So you can clearly tell that, we didn't really, we didn't really create these. Like somehow the stack of things
They
that
always
happened
come in
before.
threes.
They do? I haven't
always.
seen that.
As the VC hat on, whenever you're seeing a deal, there's two more out there. You just haven't seen them. So you have to be aware of that.
That's interesting. But yeah, we were pretty bummed. We're like, but it's, I guess, validation. Justin TV, it wasn't so successful in terms of the SaaS and the growth, but became Twitch, so became the big winner there, that was sold to Amazon. Ustream sold to IBM, and then we sold later to Vimeo. But it was an amazing time of the early days of what now everybody takes for granted. But it was fascinating. We would go, obviously trying to raise capital from strategic or VC, and the question we'd get all the time is like, now with video on demand on YouTube and on Netflix, and there was no Netflix, but whatever the equivalent, people would be like, but who needs live? Like, if you can, and it was like a real struggle to explain that there was a lot of value in live. For all the reasons we know now. It's not the same thing as recorded content, just another category. But now, obviously, it's, I don't think we'll have, if I was starting a live video company, we would be having these discussions. So it's really great to see how normal it is now, and, how part of the world it is, the expectation that anyone can live stream.
What was the turning point when you knew it was going to work?
I think the investor journey, the capital kind of P&L journey was, I put a few $100,000. Then we got a few private investors, some from Europe, kind of got another $2 million in. I was not having good traction with, your standard VCs at the time. We did a deal with Gannett, actually, the newspaper company, which invested $10 million. So that was a good day, right, to scale. But with that, the service was getting more and more popular. We actually were not using CDN. We were one of the first customers on Amazon Web Services. But the bill became about $500,000 a month.
Wow.
So 10 million is not much. And so we were kind of, depleting cash. We didn't have any monetization. We couldn't raise any more money. And that really wasn't looking good. And then we started the premium SaaS service, right? So if you wanted to remove ads and you wanted more storage, more video quality, we started Livestream Pro or Premium, $3.99 a month, something like that. And just as soon as we launched it, revenue came in, and then we quickly got to a break-even point, within a year. So that was the point, enabling the SaaS service, and realizing that we could get to a point where we're not dependent on the next funding. We will have options for the future. So,
do you think you could have launched with a SaaS service versus waiting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we, I think you have to go all in one way, trying to create, a Twitch or, a competitor to YouTube Live. Or you obviously should just go premium right out of the gate. I think, as you know, the expectation to pay for services is increasing all the time. And personally, I prefer to just pay directly and kick the tires with a trial, when I'm purchasing services. And rather than kind of services that are mixed premium and free, and it's like you're not clear where you are. So I think that user or customer behavior is ever increasing now. So yeah, it should have probably been a premium white label player, focus on quality or ease of use and so on. Maybe a bit more affordable. You can see now we know obviously Vimeo very well has built a very big, there's public information about their revenue, but a very big SaaS video business with $7 a month or $50 a month or something like that. So maybe lower price and directly premium. I think so.
Kind of an interesting narrative. You, Justin TV, launched, had interesting technology, maybe didn't have product market fit, and both found different market segments.
Oh, it was really interesting.
It clicked.
And that was a debate, the gaming. So the history was, so firstly, as we've done live streaming, I mean, there are $1 billion subsets of ID within live streaming everywhere. and there's still many that are not known, billion-dollar, valuation, whatever you want to call it, right? And there's so many, right? And it was always clear. So like, I probably think you could do a house of worship related service and get to a unicorn. That was kind of a very big category. And gamers, we had Mojang streaming. There was no Twitch, there was no gaming service. And we actually built an encoder called Procaster for gamers. And we were by far, between Justin TV, Ustream, and us, we were the most popular gaming category service in the early days, right?
Right.
And it was, wow, suddenly, Mojang comes and plays Minecraft, and we have, 100,000 people on the network. And we had many times the debate, should we focus on a vertical, and should we focus on gaming? And you gotta, give it to the Justin TV people, the team. They saw it. They saw what we saw. We all had the opportunity. They seized it. They gave up everything else. Now, they didn't have to give up anything. We had $30 million a year revenue to give up, to basically pivot into gaming. So it would have been a much harder decision for us. And by the way, we might not have executed as well as they did. They really provided a great experience and captured the community and added business models on it. But yeah, it could have been us, but so are the other $500 billion idea related to live stream that
Right.
some we know now and some we don't.
And an interesting narrative in there that success can be a liability or a blocker. Right?
Yeah, the success and survival. We had other revenue stream as well. We had a production business. We had an advertising business with news stations. So on one hand, we were not the classic. Here's 50 million from or 100 from a name brand VC behind us, and don't worry about monetization. Let's focus later. So we didn't have that, and so a lot of it was surviving, right? Like proving the business, and it can be limiting if you don't get the big one. But it's entrepreneurship. The most important is to keep going and create value. So that's what we did.
So can you give us an overview of Launcher? I think to an outsider, they're going to look at it and think it's kind of like a SpaceX, right? But that's a pretty layman's view of what you're doing. Will you kind of fill in the blanks, give us a little color around where you sit in the market and what the firm's doing?
But actually, the parallel for me to what's happening in aerospace or in launch and satellite is, back to 95, the early days of the internet. So, or even the early days of computers, which I wasn't there. But it's like, if you had started a computer company, probably at the time there was only Microsoft and Apple or IBM. People would have said, you're just trying to be another Microsoft. And you look at today, and that's just a ridiculous analogy. There's such a big ecosystem and a need for many entrepreneurs to do many things. So that my view is that we are right at the beginning of what we can do in space exploration and low Earth orbit services. It's just the beginning. It's been stagnant since the first satellite, which was Sputnik in 1957. And I want to be, part of it. Obviously, the most successful, the biggest, and that will remain. And that really made it even possible to create a startup like Launcher without a few $100 million to get going is obviously SpaceX and Elon Musk. But that's the macro view. So if you look at what we're doing, we're building a small rocket to deliver small satellite to orbit. So yeah, it's a rocket. SpaceX is delivering satellite to orbit. Now they're doing Starlink, and it's smaller. Why is it smaller? Well, because it's useful now. Before, if you had a small rocket, there was no small satellite, so it wasn't useful. And now it is. So the barrier of entry is lowered. To be honest, everyone that's trying to build a small rocket is really trying to build the biggest rocket they could build. And the bigger is, to some extent more useful. But you have to be able to start somewhere. And so for the context, there's many, some people that might watch, there are many, startup like Launcher trying to build rocket to go to orbit, but you have to remove the whole noise from the market. So out of the 200 countries around the world, only 11 have reached orbit. Only 11 have delivered something with their own rocket, their own technology to orbit. I can tell you that every single one of them want to have this capability so that they could put defense satellite, Earth observation and communication satellite and so on without having to do international deals with allies that have that technology. So that's the first, if you think about that, wow, that's a lot of demand for this technology. All these other countries, obviously, we only want to work with the ones that are allies and of the government with government permission, because this is restricted. And then if you look at the number of satellites, so between 1957 to today, there's only been 5,000 satellites ever sent to orbit. And out of these, only maybe 1,000 to 2,000 are operational. Right now, between entrepreneurs getting involved in satellite launch, and we'll explain why that's not possible, and the government and the internet constellations such as Starlink, it's not possible to build high-speed, low-latency internet from low Earth orbit. There are proposals to send more than 30,000 satellites in the next 5 years. So it might happen.
And these are mainly telecommunication technologies?
Everything. So firstly, you have even if the viewers don't know, why do we even need satellites, right? And so people don't realize somebody, I think Everyday Astronaut is a great creator for space, should check him out, came up with this idea, or echoed this idea, that we should have a satellite awareness day and stop all the satellite service for a day, so everybody kind of gets an idea. But the one that most people know, but the Air Force created GPS, and we use GPS, everywhere: Uber, Google Maps, Waze, whatever. There's Earth observation. We gather a lot of data, from observing the Earth for economic needs and trading and so on. There's all the weather. How do we know what the weather is like in the ocean? And how do we have ships coming from China safely to California to deliver goods from Amazon? All of that is because of satellites. We have safety and in hurricanes and so on from satellite. We have high-end communication from the sea that relies on satellite. We have Earth observation. How do we know that we have problems with the atmosphere and with oceans rising and so on? We use satellite technology. So there's an incredible amount of value there. In the traditional way you would build and launch a satellite service before, let's say 5 years ago, the equation was usually about $100 million to $1 billion to design and build a satellite, single one, and then about $100 million to launch it. So you're not sending one satellite if you can't fund at least, let's say, $300 million before. And if you really want to build a real service with 3 or 4 satellites, you need cash flow for your operation and marketing, whatever you're doing, right? Communication, it's multiple billions of dollars of investment. And only governments and publicly traded, like a DirecTV type company, used to play there. So now, because of the mobile phone supply chain, you can make a useful satellite the size of a loaf of bread, right? And you couldn't before. The electronics are smaller. You can have great sensors and cameras and so on. And what's interesting is this satellite, the BOM is about $100,000, and to launch them is about $200,000 or $300,000. So an entrepreneur that's skilled, out of college, by raising about a couple of $1 million, you can have a demonstration satellite, right? A single one. But the other thing that's interesting with this small satellite architecture is because they're so low cost, you can send hundreds of them. And if you can send hundreds of them, you can put them in lower orbits that last maybe 5 years and before it burns up. But that makes it more useful because you're closer to the Earth, whether you're doing communication or sensors or cameras. So all of it, the architecture has changed. Who can get involved has changed. And so the first market is just copying the incumbent. So there's an example is a company called Planet. It's one of the success stories there. They have 300 small satellites the size of a loaf of bread, imaging the Earth every 24 hours. And they compete with some of the companies that have these incredible, and even the National Reconnaissance Office that have incredible, large, high-resolution imaging satellite, but they have 5 or 1. So they're competing totally differently, where they are, doing more, more refresh basically of the entire Earth. It's a different data set. It's not the same resolution. And every 5 years or less, their satellite is burning up, but they don't care because they want the next generation of sensors and they want to keep replenishing the constellation. So it's a paradigm shift that you have a set of startups that are trying to compete with the incumbents. You have also the government at the same, some of the same challenge. We have, it's not known exactly how many we have. It's classified, but let's say we have $4 billion imaging satellite that we position over different targets on the Earth.
When you say we, you mean the U.S.?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, not launcher. The problem, the incredible technology, the problem is that we have only 5 of them, and our adversaries now have technology with lasers to fry all the electronics from the ground. And so even the government, with this incredibly expensive, important asset of the country, they have started small satellite initiative, not to replace them, they still need them, but to maybe have 200 small satellite that do more like what Planet is doing. It's harder to target them, and they're everywhere all the time, so you don't really know. So all of this is creating the demand for these small satellite and the demand for small rocket, which are, if you can make them affordable enough, they can get your satellite, your small satellite, or your bunch of 10 small satellite to the right orbit, and it's your mission. You're not just the third level payload, under a mission of a $1 billion satellite. And so SpaceX or whoever else it is doesn't really care about your $100,000 satellite. You'll go where they go, when they go. So that's the need. And currently there's many companies that are trying, but there's really only one that's been successful at it in the US. It's Rocket Lab, an incredible company. So the small SpaceX in terms of rocket size, but incredible in skills. And then you have one in China as well. I forget the name.
What's the advantage of a smaller rocket, just for folks listening? Why does that matter? Why not just load more satellites into bigger rockets?
Well, one of the big challenges is that if you have a constellation, you want all your satellites to go to different orbits and different place. And so having a small rocket allows you to choose, you can, for 5 to 10 million, you can buy the whole rocket and design the whole mission for your needs. If you go on Falcon 9, you can get more mass. It's cheaper actually on a per kilogram mass. So think about the small rocket like Uber, and the Falcon 9 is like the bus, right? Or the subway. It's cheaper, but it doesn't go when you want to go. It doesn't go where you want to go. And there's, competing approach. Some people are trying to, or some people are building, tugs to then take you from somewhere else, but then you don't have the reliability of Falcon 9, and it's not the price of Falcon 9, because a company called Momentus, for example, that is trying to go public with a SPAC, but you now have to pay for their margin and their reliability on top of yours, and so on. But there'll be space. The Air Force wants small launchers so that they can replenish their constellation, their small satellite constellation, in a targeted way. And they want it to be more affordable. Right now, there's a premium, but they want it to be more available for more providers. But they also want the large rocket, right? So it's just not a product that is needed. On the international level, I think for launcher, there's a really, in the same way the United States, we sell F-35s to many allied nations around the world. We love selling unique technology with State Department approval. That's something we do as a country. In the same way, there are many countries around the world that would like a native capability to launch small satellite. They'd like maybe a bigger rocket, but that's a lot more expensive. So a useful small rocket is where they want to start. And I think there's a licensing opportunities as well. Again, if you look back, only 11 countries and 2 private companies. Both are doing really, really, really well. So that's a good place to invest in and arrive, especially if you have a unique product. And back to the unique product you were asking, so our differentiator out of all the other companies that are trying is we're not trying to optimize for time to market. They're all trying to rush with pretty aggressive timeline, and our developing team that goes, that are building everything at the same time. Our view is to focus on performance and have the highest performance engine at the lowest cost. And the reason that's important is that the biggest passenger on an orbital rocket is the propellant. It's more than 90% of the mass. And so if the equivalent of the rocket miles per gallon, how much propellant you consume for a given amount of thrust, if you can be a few percentage better than your competitor, you're going to be able to not just increase your payload a little bit, you're going to be able to double it or triple it. And the piece I didn't mention is the payload is only 1 to 3% on the best rocket of the mass. Correct. And on the second stage, it's 1 to 1. You save 1 pound of propellant, you get 1 pound of satellite extra. And on the first stage, there's 2 stages, like a third. But that's the bet. And we're not trying to go, exotic propellants and things that have never been done. We're doing it with 3D printing. We're doing it at a very low cost of other traditional engine, but the best engine in the world is still a Russian engine designed without computer in the 70s. And in the same way that a diesel car engine, it's known, but it's still very hard to make a reliable, high efficiency one. So we're applying. We're doing a lot of with our chief designer that's originally from Ukraine, now with green card in New York. We're applying a lot of the high performance known designs, but to a small rocket using 3D printing. That's our real unique approach at Launcher.
So, Max, you work with the State Department, right? Anytime you do anything with rockets, I'm sure the U.S. government gets involved. How does that happen? Is there a car of men in black showing up and there's some, they accost you, throw you in the back of the van, and they start having conversations? Or is it more like an episode of Office Space? What is the experience of the State Department? Do they reach out to you? How does that go?
Well, the first thing is that it's between the Department of Defense and the State Department and all of the providers of technology, of orbital space technology. It's a very small and close community. Everybody knows each other. So our first firstly we were selected to pitch at the Air Force Space Pitch Day, the first one in November last year. And there it's a closed room pitch with all of the leaders of Space Missile Command, the Secretary of State, Barrett at the time, the Secretary of the Air Force, Barbara Barrett at the time. And we were able to pitch Launcher. And as part of their desire to innovate, it's really interesting on their side. They used to have, 50 startup building airplanes. And, in the 60s, there'd be like 4 new airplanes a year that would fly, experimental. And now they're into a cycle where it takes them 20 years to create one airplane, like the F-35, from one vendor, Lockheed Martin. So the Will Roper, the undersecretary of the Air Force, is trying to bring, Silicon Valley-style innovation into the Air Force to basically make sure we don't get defeated by our adversaries, because we need to bring back the pace of innovation, be faster. So they are putting a lot of capital into small startups and entrepreneurs like myself to support them. Not all the way. They want, obviously, VCs and investors. But so far, in our case, we won from the Air Force division that's now the Space Force. We won a $1.5 million grant to test the engine we had designed. And we also have an agreement with NASA to test it at their test stand at NASA's Stennis. So slowly, as you start doing innovation, the last 3 years before that, we were doing a 1,000-pound engine at our test stand on Long Island. And we created enough data and videos to show that our design are high efficiency and we know what we're doing. Then we go to the next level. We have the Air Force, now the Space Force, saying, this engine, if it really worked, if it was that efficient, that will be an asset to the country, right? For our launch vehicle, but maybe other applications there. So, they don't give us the whole capital to develop it, but they support us and award us enough based on milestone to continue to check us, can they do this? We're hoping that continues as we win more, and then eventually we win a launch from them. So that's how we get to know that community. Then we get to know the launchpad community, different Air Force base and NASA base to, eventually we obviously need to launch the rocket. And it's all pretty natural. It's like, don't trip, we were invited to the Pentagon to do a briefing, and these calls just keep happening.
It's a lot less exciting than I was hoping.
For the State Department, I hope I never see the black van, but you have basically our lawyers in Washington, D.C., there's processes, and it's not that exciting. You describe, if you want a permission, for example, to work with Ukraine or something like that, some project we have, you describe what you want to do and you follow the process, and then they grant you an approval and ask you questions. But it's not face-to-face yet. So that's
right.
The long, boring answer to your question.
Yeah, but most of this, they're giving you grants. They don't want equity in the company. They're trying to get you to build the technology so they can be a customer later. Is that the right?
Yeah. So from their point of view, they don't want to be in a single vendor situation. So the Air Force or the Space Force doesn't build rocket themselves. They buy from the defense industry and the aerospace industry. They don't want to end up in a situation where there's only SpaceX left. there. That's not a good day. And they've had that in the past, a monopoly. That's not great. So they're into diversification of companies, and they are into diversification of formats, right? Like a big rocket, a small one, and different. So
Right.
that's their goal in funding it, and it's part of that bigger agenda that I was mentioning for Will Roper, which is we want to reboot the defense innovation in the country, and we're going to allocate. They're allocating billions of dollars, and the USPs are we are becoming easier and easier to work with. It's been amazing. It's like the speed at which we were pitching and then being awarded, and then the simplicity of the contract and the payment. I would have never imagined that working with the government would be this easy. But it's part of this thing of trying to accelerate and make it easier. And then the big pitch is exactly as you said, and if you work with us, we don't take any equity. We just want you to succeed.
Right. Now, this may now sound a little bit paranoid, and I don't think it's a question I've ever thought about in the context of a startup. Are you worried at all about spying? Is this something you have to pay attention to internally with trade secrets and technology? And if yes, what do you do to manage that maybe a normal tech startup is not doing?
So the technology that we develop, which is propulsion for orbital launch vehicle, right, peaceful use using satellite, can also be used for weapons. It's called dual-use technology, and that's not our goal. It's not what we're trying to do at Launcher. And as a result, it's basically controlled through a treaty called ITAR. And for example, the F-35 I was mentioning, the Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin can't. The salesperson of Lockheed Martin can't go to countries and sell it. They can kind of initiate it, but for the deal to happen, the State Department need to do what they do, leverage other deals, whatever, and then approve it. And so all the technology that relate to propulsion and launch vehicle is really into like a safe box in terms of the IP within the United States. It's not. We can sell it around the United States so long as it's safely handled as ITAR. But we cannot sell it outside, and that means also who can work on it. It has to be green card holder or U.S. citizen, or we have to get a license. But we cannot export this IP without a permission, and that's just the way it is.
There's not some sort of special background checking you have to do when people come in. This is the State Department reviewing who you hire. Is any of that happening?
The ITAR is the first level. In the government, you have top secret and other type of ITAR is kind of the most benign of them. And what we have to make sure is that we don't leak this information outside, and only U.S. citizen or green card holder have access to it. That's our, and so we have obviously encryption and storage, and there are rules you follow for ITAR. But for example, we had one of our team member is Spanish, and we did get him a license, and so he could work on certain aspect of our engine, not all of it. And so you have to manage that. But it's actually, a lot of people are worried and scared about it, and it's the IT procedures and then permission procedures that are, it takes a bit of time, but we just get it done. Now, back to your question about spying or cybersecurity. As you mature, right now we're only in the development stage, right? Like the it's not a proven design that goes to orbit. It will be. And so as you get closer to that, of course you will have adversaries. That's the right term. We're in a game, with many countries. And of course you'll have adversaries attempting to steal it. Imagine if you could get all the blueprints of in the software code from Falcon 9 of SpaceX. That's kind of in the spy game, that's kind of a good asset, right? So absolutely, as you get closer, as the stakes get higher, it becomes probably, one of the top priority at companies like SpaceX that have a finished product. For us, it's on the way, and we do obviously all the best practice you would expect in following ITAR and IT security there.
So satellites, I think at this point, are relatively commonly understood to be commercially viable space tech. But there's other parts of the media story around space technology. Could you opine on the following? Space tourism. Is that a viable, practical thing? Is it far-fetched? Is it on the come? Where does that fit in the world of reality as an insider in the industry?
Well, the space industry is small, so I'm going to be careful at what I say. But my point of view is that I'm very frustrated that there's a lack of understanding of orbit and space. And so space is just going on a joyride to above 50 miles, right? It's an arbitrary line. And people think that when you go to space, when you turn off the engine, you are in space. Well, no, when you go to space and you turn off the engine, you go right back to where you started. And that's
Right.
what's
There's
called
still gravity.
suborbital. That's what Jeff Bezos is trying to do with New Shepard. That's what Virgin Galactic is trying to do. Personally, I'm a macro fan of space exploration and taking risk with people's life for actual space exploration. I consider these joyrides, and I think they don't make sense. The risk of being on a rocket, like I want to go to orbit. I want to go to the space station. I want to go to Mars. I want to go to the moon. I don't want to take that ride. I mean, if you died on that, it would be the most ridiculous thing you did. And by the way, because you just went, you didn't even go to orbit space, and you were like, what appears like lack of gravity, where you can get on a plane, you're just falling back on Earth for just a few minutes, and then your family is there waiting for you at the same spot. Now, orbit is the process of going to that altitude and then accelerating horizontally at 7.5 kilometers a second. That's about 20,000 miles an hour. And basically, once you reach that speed and you are outside the Earth atmosphere, when you turn off the engine, you stay there indefinitely, depending on the orbit, right? And if you go faster, you go beyond the Earth. That, I think, is a very important activity for humans to do, building infrastructure in low Earth orbit and starting to explore the stars. And I think tourism related to orbit is something I'm very excited about. Going to the space station, or some of the early space tourists that went to orbit. So there's a big differentiation. Not a fan. I think doesn't make sense, the suborbital space tourism, and I'm a big fan of orbital space tourism or travel beyond that. I think it's very important. The reason we went to the moon is because, and the public wanted us to go to the moon. The money comes through Congress and Senate and the president. And at that time, not everybody wanted it, but the public wanted it for many reasons, including the Cold War and the threat of not being number one with the Russian or the Soviet. And so we need to inspire people. We need to get them excited, whether it's creators or artists or movies, like they're talking about Tom Cruise going to the space station. I look forward to the day Elon is going to go to the space station. But we need that because we need to create more awareness. You'd be shocked at how many people don't even know we have a space station. Like, it's like, oh, do we really have people living outside, the Earth?
Okay. Why does it really matter? Right? Why do space exploration? Let's take that as the next bucket.
Mm-hmm.
We all know it's a thing. We all know that there's a goal of putting people on Mars. Why is it important?
Well, it depends the future you want to be part of, right? So to me, it's very simple. There's a future where we never do it. And I think humans are, we are a virus. We can build technology that reduce our consumption and reduce our damage, but it cannot go to zero and it cannot go in net positive. We use resource to live. It's just what we do. I also think, taking even a step back, that to the idea, I care deeply about the Earth and the environment, but the idea that we need to stop the population, the increase of population on the Earth, the idea that we need to even go backward and that it's a bad thing that more humans are living, it's to me insane. I think that's our job to have, I call this concept infinite humanity. We need to dream of so many humans on so many planets that so far away from each other, we don't even know who they are and where they are, right? That's a future I can get excited about. I can't get excited at the idea that we're going to just focus on building technology to not destroy the Earth, which we should do, and we're going to limit the Earth to, 10 billion people. Oh, let's go to 5 billion people. To me, that's even genocide. Like, you not allowing these people to live, and the standard of living. I know a lot of people get depressed about what's happening on Earth and so on, but the data is that the worldwide human experience is improving every day. And of course, some people have not very good lives, but the average, I think, is worth living. It's what humanity is about, especially if you increase it. So for me, it's important because that's the future. Like, the alternative is just the most depressing thing ever. Whether it happens in this lifetime, never, or 100 lifetime, I don't know. It's a pretty crazy, ambitious goal. But I know that if we don't develop the technology and we don't contribute to it, we will never get there. And if you think about it, 1957 Sputnik sounds like, oh, space is old, these black and white images. But for the, on this 10,000 year timeline where, eventually I hope we're not extinct and, children's of whatever are learning at school what's important and they're not on Earth. I mean, that's crazy. That just happened like a second ago. Like so I was, before 1957, we had never put anything in orbit. We didn't even know what would happen, if it was possible, or whatever. And so we have just done this, and the technology is accelerating, 3D printing, small electronics, whatever. And, on a lifetime, I guess it's like, oh, really old, 2 generations ago. On a macro thing, is like, wow, I have the chance to be part of it. And why am I going to live my life without any interaction with it if I believe it's the future of the Earth? So that's why it matters to me. Yeah.
What about space mining? I've heard about companies that are going to mine minerals from asteroids or other planets and maybe bring it back to the Earth. Is that practical? Is that a reality? Or is that sci-fi at this point?
I mean, on a different kind of macro view, I think it's worth to have, 10% of people on Earth should be working on space exploration. The 90% other can be building resource to make the Earth better. That's how big I think it should be. And I think, talking about taking 10% of all resource, right, the 10% tax or whatever, and putting it to space exploration. If we did that, like if we knew there was an asteroid coming and destroying us, we probably would put 60% or more. But if we did that, mining and everything you talk about it's not like sci-fi in the way that it relies on technology we don't have today. It just relies on time. It takes 10, 20 years and, appropriate amount of money, in which money is really just people, right? A lot of people that are focused on that versus, building Amazon warehouse. So yeah, within that, it's not far-fetched. And when it happens, it will change everything, to a lot of the natural resource prices we have and the options we have. Is it about to happen? Would I invest in a startup doing it? Probably not. But it will happen. The opportunity today, in my view, is related to low Earth orbit. Whether some of the tip of what you see is Starlink is an incredible opportunity, and that's just the beginning. I think we should start with that, and then the government should take us beyond that to the moon and to Mars. Maybe not with their own rocket, maybe with other people's rocket, but that will take a while before that's a money-making endeavor. But low Earth orbit, it's now. I think next 10 years, big time.
So last question in this bucket, this category of space tech, Space Force.
Mm-hmm.
It's a popular word now. The average American, the average person around the world maybe knows of this. Is it practical? Why do we need it? How does it fit into the scheme of what's capable? What risks are they addressing? I think we just get headlines and we don't get enough color without being in the space industry to understand why it matters.
I mean, firstly, the Space Force has existed the last 30 years. It's called, in part, Space and Missile Command within the Air Force. And so their mission has been to, first use space to use the latest technology instead of sending you to plane, having a satellite looking at what North Korea is doing and China and whatnot. So, if you believe and also have communication infrastructure for our military and so on. So if you believe, which obviously I do believe, that we need an adequate and the world leading, defense and military, that part of the job is the air domain, putting infrastructure up there to support everything else and having the best one. Out of that came GPS, and that was created, and it's actually donated to the world by the Air Force. It's an incredible thing that people don't know. And then things have accelerated. There's been many treaties that says we shouldn't put bombs, nuclear bomb, and I really hope we never do, and I hope we haven't yet. The world in this case, in orbit, and we should not weaponize space. But for whatever reason, these developments have evolved, and now there are adversaries, so meaning other countries, have technology that with a laser they can disable any satellite. So now you have all these assets that we need, right? We can't do anything, our aircraft carriers or drones, whatever you think, if you believe in the military we need, they are subject to only a few of these, bus-sized satellite that countries, if we started a war, can aim a laser at and stop. So that's what we would call a contested domain, like the oceans, that you need to defend. And so we've been doing that for a long time. And the Space Force is all about, it's not this hidden thing that no one knows about as part of the Air Force. It is, its own top level Department of Defense organization. I think it makes a lot of sense, and I think it's great that if you believe we should have an Air Force, I don't see any reason why you should believe we should have a Space Force, given the recent developments.
I know it can drive founders crazy to wait while websites are in development. And I'm thinking of all the people who have built mobile apps and the stuff that consumers are used to engaging with. I'd imagine the development cycles are much longer for building spaceships, engines and other types of technology. How do you stay sane?
I mean, my first experience with hardware, right, is consumer electronics, is the camera called Mevo. And a lot of people are afraid of hardware, right? It's hardware is hard and you have to manufacture it. It's not just software. But the process that exists is slower. But they're really good and reliable, and I really enjoy them, right? It takes a year to make a new camera, and you go through, design and then prototyping, and then, you get your tooling made, and then your manufacturer makes a few runs, and then at the end of it, right now we're going for Mevo. Next year we hope to do more than 100,000 cameras, and it's like literally you cut some POs, and then you source inspect 5,000 of them at the factory through a third party. Then it shows up in a warehouse you've never seen in California, and then it goes to Amazon and customers. So it's slower, but the level of professionalism and the process, make it even I think more enjoyable to develop. There's more at stake. You pay more attention. You don't change it last minute, but the product can be equally as good and innovative. So longer timeline was already my experience building the Mevo camera and others. For Launcher, we're on a 10-year timeline and a 4-year timeline to build the engine. For example, we did a test in October at NASA for our full-size 22,000-pound thrust, 10-ton combustion chamber. And we learned a few things, and now we're printing another one in December. We're changing the design now. We're printing in December. It'll arrive in January, February. We'll do all the machining and so on. In March, we will test again. So, October to March, that's kind of the timeline for serial number 2.
Those are long cycles.
Yeah, but during that, you're playing a chess game. And so you have this thread, right? And we have this thread, which is we need our combustion chamber and our injector to work perfectly by the end of 2021. And maybe it's that iteration or the one after. And every 4 months you have an iteration. But at the same time, we're developing our pump and we're developing our avionics. And so you can't be impatient, and you have to start a lot of threads in parallel. And you have to really make sure you don't get into tech dead end. That's where in hardware, if you make the wrong choice, right, you build your avionics with the wrong processor, or you choose the wrong material for your 3D printed engine, or the wrong 3D printer, or the wrong cycle, you can make this dead end and spin for 3 years and then nothing at the end.
Right.
So that's the biggest stake, and I think that's why it's one of my skills, I think, at least, that I've developed, to avoid that, measuring the risk architecturally, of the technical choice. But that's the slowness makes it problematic if you made the wrong choice. It really is fatal. But other than that, it's a barrier of entry, right? Like once you get going, I mean, you can see SpaceX, they've been at it since 2002, 18 years, and it's like a steamroller train, right, of technology that keeps adding on top of each other, and groups of people that get like attracted like atoms to each other. So, once you get going, it's fast. I mean, I don't think you need it faster personally.
Historically, a lot of the heaviest, most sophisticated, particularly hardware technologies have been built out of the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
I run a New York-based firm, as you know, and I'm out here in New York with you. How has NYC served as a location for Launcher?
Well, the origin of the aerospace or aero industry was Long Island. The lunar lander that went on the moon was actually developed in Bethpage on Long Island. So it started here, and then it kind of spread to the West Coast in the last 4 or 5 decades. There, for building a hardware or building any startup, you need a place where people with families can go and live and be excited, and graduates can come and live and be excited. And I think New York City is as good as all the other metropolis, LA being another aerospace one. But what we have, here, which is also amazing, we've had a lot of political support, and we're unique, so we're able to attract talent without any problem. In terms of infrastructure, you anyway go. SpaceX doesn't test in LA; they test in Texas. We test now. We used to test on Long Island, the small stuff. The big stuff we tested at NASA Stennis. So from that point of view, it doesn't matter where your design and your factory is. So I think New York is going to end up being a great asset for us. And the other thing that's also very different is, since I started Launcher, is if you build an internet company, an AI company, whatever, you're going to compete with Facebook, Google on talent, salaries. It's going to be really tough as a startup beyond the founder
Absolutely.
to get the top talent. With propulsion and rocket, and we get job application multiple times a day unsolicited. I don't even have a jobs page on the website. We should, and people will move from anywhere to. If they believe you're building it and you're going to fly, it doesn't really matter where you are for the top talent. So in that way, aerospace or propulsion technology or rocket has been it's been really, really refreshing. The quality of the people and the demand. And if you take it back, there are more space startups than there's ever been, and there are more 3D printed rocket engine developed than there's ever been. But there's still like only maybe 5 to 8 US liquid rocket engine being developed right now actively, right? How many
Right.
startups do you have to compete with? So it's a lot more than before, which was between 0 and 1 at any time, a new engine being made, but it's still like nothing, 8, like that's it. So if you want to work on this technology as a graduate, or you're an experienced person, it's the team and the progress we've made and the approach. And New York is actually a great plus to the equation of attracting this talent.
What does the space industry need at this point? For the people listening to this, how can they
Mhm.
help?
I
What
mean, for
should
me,
new entrepreneurs build?
the biggest thing is public support and public understanding and awareness. That's the biggest differentiator. And you have actually two big groundswell going on. One worries me and one encourages me. So the first one is, if you watch a SpaceX or any launch, even ULA, which is the government with Lockheed Martin and Boeing, or now Rocket Lab, any launch to orbit of any satellite or humans, you're seeing more and more and more viewers on YouTube and other places. So the content, the interest is growing every day. It's a groundswell of young people mostly, I believe, and creators that are helping, making it popular. And that's really happening. So that's good. We need that, right? We need all these people, whether they're voters now or later, to, in my opinion, right, to tell the congressman that they should be, we should be allocating more resource to space exploration. On the other end, you also have the more concerning piece, at least again in my opinion, which is, we should exclusively fix the Earth. There's too much, obviously, suffering and poverty, and any space exploration is a fantasy, and it shouldn't happen, and we should not even worry about this. And it goes even further to and the billionaires doing it, meaning Elon Musk, I guess, and Jeff Bezos, are just trying to be escapist and wasting our money on this stuff just for their fantasies. And that is dangerous, and that's also growing, unfortunately, at these two really opposing views. I see them. Which one I hope will win. And I hope what will win is obviously a better understanding of what is the orbit and space, not just this abstract thing, and a better awareness that we need to do, save the Earth and use space to make the Earth better, and invest strategically in it. So that's what I hope, and that comes from it needs to be more popular and it needs to be more understood. And then the government can allocate more funding to it. Whether we build this rocket to go to the moon in 2024, we do it later with the Elon Musk rocket or whatever. I personally don't really care. But what I care is that the NASA's budget grows and the general investment in the industry grows. I care that more engineers coming out of school are working on this problem than today, basically.
Where do you see the space industry in 10 years? I mean, it sounds like you're hoping it's going to garner more attention, more support. What does it look like 2030?
I mean, it's not, I'm not hoping. I mean, you can see there was zero VC and PE investment, well, maybe some PE, but zero VC seed to Series C into satellite or launch companies 5 years ago, or maybe 7 years ago, and now it's there, right? And so I'm hoping that really grows. And then on the other side, you have commercial success that are starting, SpaceX, Rocket Lab. I mean, you can see everybody wants SpaceX to IPO, and they're creating a vacuum, but there's definitely a groundswell of interest to invest more on that side. Today, it's not a hope. And then the government, is investing more. Point. That's a fact. That's just going to keep increasing and increasing and increasing for defense need and for backup need, and also to be the leader in aerospace in the world. So all of that, I see a world where we go from 5,000 satellites, 2,000 are useful, to a world where we have, maybe 20 to 30,000. We have new services that you and I can't even think about today, in the same way when the day the iPhone came, you couldn't predict Uber and I wish we could have predicted all the top apps, but we couldn't.
Me too.
So we definitely will have, or maybe you did. I don't know if you invested, but
I got a few of them.
No one could predict with full certainty. So we're going to see new applications as well as a growing market, and we're getting the entrepreneurs involved. I mean, what I'm talking to you about before. Even Elon Musk, which opened it up with $100 million. When he started SpaceX, there was $100 million in the bank account. No one would want to join, and everybody was laughing at it. And today, all of the vendors, all of the suppliers of parts are interested in us because we could be the next one. We might not be, but they can't afford to ignore them.
Right.
They might not be in their point of view. And, SpaceX and Elon Musk get to sue the Air Force to get them to speak to them. We are invited to pitch to the leadership, and we get $1.5 million.
Wow, what a change!
We have to thank him. For me, he's the Steve Jobs or the Bill Gates of the space industry. I'm sure he wants a monopoly and he doesn't want anyone else to play. But I think the reality is, I think there will be a bunch of companies of different size, and a full ecosystem thriving in the next 30 years, and many, many, many entrepreneurs. In the space, to a point that it's not weird, like, oh, you just want to build another SpaceX. It'd be like a normal thing. Of course, we should be having innovation in low Earth orbit and beyond.
Max, your story as an entrepreneur, through all of the legs of the journey that you've shared, are fascinating. You've had experiences that I think very few people, maybe in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, have had in general. What is the most important thing you've learned? If you could give everybody listening to this a bit of advice that would help them, what would it be?
One of them is, I have two. One of them is, if you don't make a decision, somebody will make it for you. That's just the way I live in entrepreneurship. to have triggers, right? Because your company and your team is really an organism or an algorithm. And my job is to make sure that we make these decisions before they're made for us, right? Whether it's running out of money and somebody close your company if you don't do it yourself, or whatever else. On the more inspiring part, what I've really learned through seeing how the team interacts with me and what inspired them to work together, and the ability to do new things, and through the career and all the things I've tried. I think my job as an entrepreneur in the early stage, which I'm now back in, is really the chief experimenter. And it's a DNA to just want to experiment all the time. And, as the more people are like throwing at me objections and reasons and process, the more I get energized and realize that, that's my job, right? This would not happen unless I was able to get rid of all the objections and give it a try, and also create a framework that we're giving it a try. We try 10 things and 2 stick, and that's the job. So I think the reality that the whole thing is an experiment, and the pace of experiments and the curation of focusing on the ones that work, and basically the only way to do it is to be okay with no process. And so more and more as I'm maturing as an entrepreneur, I'm trying to have no process. And then if you want no process, what happens is you need really amazing people that really want to work with each other. And so that's kind of a circle I'm at. And with Mevo, it's interesting. This team I'd worked with for on average 10 years, and then they went to Vimeo, and then we did a deal with Vimeo, and they kind of went back to work with me, and we all really enjoy working with each other. And it's been a year and a half, and we've grown, 3x revenue, and it's been just incredible. Launch a new product. I spend very little time, and we never have any meeting. We don't have all hands. We don't have one-on-ones. There's no process, but hey, we make 100,000 cameras, right? And we sell them, and it's been and the analysis of that, and there's no drama. Is just you can only do that if you have the most incredible team, and then a vision and a place they want to go. So that's, I think one of the best lessons for me has been taking me time to realize that. So.
Let me ask a clarifying question, because Agile is a very popular method. When you say no process, do you mean there's no method where you're not meeting on a certain frequency? There's no structure. It's simply things need to happen and you rely on them happening.
An example
How does
is
this function? How does this function?
You when you want to start with people that want to compartmentalize, this person shouldn't have access to this tool on Amazon, and this person, hard limits instead of just working together. I just get rid of all of that. And so it's an experiment at Mevo. I think at some scale we'll change it. But it's the connection, what I'm trying to articulate is the connection between an inspired team that's very, very talented engineers that want to work together. So they're matrix, they're not, there's no drama in politics. And if you can get that, then you can operate without any, all hands and big meetings and weekly meetings and tag up. But we do it all just organically, and it works incredibly. And, they still have a call every week with our manufacturer in China, and we have source inspection, we have accounting, and but it's the idea of just minimum viable process is, I guess, and so somebody is trying to put a process at Mevo, at least, I'm not interested. And so far it's working incredibly. But the point here, it sounds a bit radical, but right now it's working. But it's, you can't do that without the team that can do it and want to do it. And so, picking and working and creating that team is what allows it. But if you think about it, when you put a process, it's just to control a lack of trust in teams, in between people, or, when you put hard lines of responsibility, you're just as a CEO trying to manage something that's already broken. That's kind of my more recent, entrepreneurial experimental learning.
How big
Maybe
is that
ask me in a few
currently?
years whether it made sense.
Yeah, I was going to say we need to do a check back when the team's larger.
Yeah. No, like anything, right? Like in a startup, everything changes as you keep going. Mevo is 40 people, and it's working great that way right now. So,
Max, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Great. No, thanks. You've asked. You should that should be your profession. Get rid of that VC thing. You've asked really, really like a deep question. You got me talking. So
This is
I
fascinating.
hope no one was bored. But
No,
thank
I
you.
wasn't. I'm grateful for you to share. I feel like I learned a lot. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Huge thanks to Max for explaining how the space industry operates. I hope everyone enjoyed the show. If you enjoyed this, please hook us up with a like and let us know what you think about space exploration in the comments. Also, feel free to share with a friend. You can find me on Twitter @MPD, and if you're watching this and prefer to listen, you can subscribe on any major podcast platform. Just search for Innovation with Mark Peter Davis.